Welcome back. In this video, we'll look at the Prepottery Neolithic B period, which followed the Prepottery Neolithic A period and lasted from 9,200 to 8,000 years before the present. So there are many significant differences between PPNB and PPNA communities. Towns had farming and domesticated animals combined. So by this time, they had domesticated animals to some point. There was quite a bit more wealth. People were engaged in arts and crafts because with the combination of animals and grains, people could feed the animals, and there was plenty of meat and grain to go around for the people as well. Also, instead of round huts, they had square buildings with plaster, and they also invented the loom and soft cloth, and many other technologies. So in this video, we're going to focus on a community near Amman. So Amman is the capital of Jordan, and that's called Ain Ghazal, with the Arabic G probably. And then we are also going to look again at Jericho, and also we'll look at the Wadi Fanan cultures. Here's Wadi Fanan, and remember it had circular subterranean buildings. Well, now they've moved to rectilinear building construction, and there was plaster on this probably. And so you can see that the building has dramatically improved. And also, they not only plastered their buildings, and by the way, they plastered their floors, so they had nice plaster floors, but they also had an interesting technique where they would, like I said before, they unburied a skull in the PPNA over in this region, and they would cover the skull with plaster, and then they would put it on some sort of a model or body. And also they had two-headed figures, which are copyrighted, so I didn't put them on here, but you can go to this website and look at them. And for some reason, that represented the sister city relationship of Jericho and Ain Ghazal. And Ain Ghazal is on the Zarqa River in Amman. I've been there in Amman. And you can look across to Jerusalem, across the Jordan Valley. Everything is very compressed there. So the fact that Jericho was on the other side of the Jordan Valley from Ain Ghazal, they were still really close. So here's the PPNB phase at Jericho. So remember I said it had been abandoned, I think, in 9,200 years before the present. Well, it was settled again in 9,000 years before the present. And then they were engaging in this rectilinear construction rather than the round huts. And they had buildings with several rooms. But unfortunately, Jericho was abandoned again during the 8.2 Ka drought. And that was a time when almost all of the communities I will be and I have talked about in the PPNB were abandoned, at least in the Fertile Crescent. But this community was not. This was a community, this was the largest PPNB community. It's Katal Hoyuk, and it was in Turkey. And so the drought that reached, the 8.2 Ka drought that decimated the Fertile Crescent did not decimate Katal Hoyuk. They had some effect. So they built this city up on these large mounds over their agricultural areas. And actually there was a river going past these mounds at the time. And for some reason during the drought, they moved from one mound to another, but they weren't completely wiped out like the other communities. And they grew their crops about 13 kilometers from the village. So they had people go over there, grow the crops, and then they would transport the food back to the community. It was really an amazing community. Here you can see all of their buildings. They didn't have streets. They walked across the top of the buildings, and then they would drop down on stairs into their little houses. And Katal Hoyuk was not considered to be civilization. All of the communities that I've been talking about were not civilization. And the reason for that is they had no large administrative buildings, which would indicate divisions of class and government. Remember I said that agricultural communities can have bad social structures like classes, low class, high class, and slavery. Well, in the communities in the PPNB, they didn't have that yet. And so it was sort of an egalitarian community. They've also noticed that men and women had equal status. And the layers of the mounds, so they've gone through the different layers of these mounds that build up over time in cities or uh, cities or villages, and they've noticed that the people gain technological skills over time. And so during the 8.2 Ka drought, there must have been some difficulty because many of these people migrated to Europe, and they actually began Neolithic communities and spread Neolithic technology to Europe, where they didn't have such an effect from this 8.2 Ka drought. 8.2 Ka means 8,200 years ago. Okay, two more communities were the Hassuna and Halaf cultures in northern Iraq. And it's hard to see where these are, but here's the Euphrates and the Tigris River. Here's the Persian Gulf. So they're up here in this Fertile Crescent area in the foothills of the Taurus Mountains. And they were actually the first potters in the Fertile Crescent. Actually, the very first potters were in China, I think 20,000 years ago. But they started engaging in pottery, I think around 8,000 years ago. And so they were also wiped out by the drought. So this is the Tepe Gura mound, which I think was a Hassuna or a Halaf community. So this is the mound that built up. These are what happened. This is what happened when there were ancient communities. They would, after thousands of years, the residue would build up a mound and then get built on top of what they had before. But prior to the drought, they had 18 inches a year, and I think, and this is like the foothills of the Taurus Mountains in northern Iraq. And then after the drought, they had very little rain, and so those communities collapsed. And so studies of caves in Israel indicate that the drought lasted from 6,200 to 6,000 BC, or 8,200 to 8,000 years ago. So it wiped out almost all the agriculture and villages in the Middle East. We'll see you next time.